Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is Scott Dill with Real Story Group. Thank you for taking some time out of your day to join us for this presentation of the new Omnichannel Stack. Our founder, Tony Byrne, will be joining us momentarily. But before we get started, I did want to mention a couple of quick housekeeping items of note. First, we encourage you to ask questions, and we do have a questions tab in the GoToWebinar control panel. So if there's something that strikes you, feel free to enter that in, and we'll get it to it at the end of the presentation today. Or if we do run out of time, then we'll be sure to email you after the presentation. Also, I do see a number of our subscribers on the line, so thanks for joining us today, and welcome. It's great to see you again. You'll be able to access a recording of this in your subscriber library, and for all attendees today, you'll be able to take a look at the slides from the presentation within the next couple days. So with that, I want to turn things over to Tony for the heart of today's presentation. Tony?
Great, thanks, Scott. I'm really excited to be with you all today. It's a really fascinating topic as the world transitions from digital experience and MarTech to more customer-centered customer experience. And we've been doing a lot of thinking about that with you over the past couple of years, and now have a new reference model around this that we call the new Omnichannel Stack, and that's what I'm going to share with you today. So we know that at least half of you are new to Real Story Group, so thanks for joining us today. We're a different kind of analyst firm. I founded it 18 years ago because of this quadrant on the left here. I was working at a systems integrator implementing some customer experience tools, and we were implementing some technologies that were in the top right hand of a magic quadrant or wave. There were significant problems with these tools, and I had to ask myself, how did we get here? How did we get to this place where there were some significant weaknesses of some of these major vendors that got obscured in these traditional analyst reports? And I thought there had to be a better way to tell the real story. So I founded Real Story Group and decided right away that we had to work only on the buy side of the table, which means we only work with you, end user customers, and that gives us a lot of freedom. We don't consult with vendors, we don't speak at vendor events, we don't write white papers, and so that allows us to tell the real story about the true strengths and weaknesses of these different technologies. We're an analyst firm, so you work with us through subscriptions, and we have three types of subscriptions. The first is what we call vendor selection advisory, and so this is you are about to undertake a selection project in one of the areas that we cover, and you want the toughest, most critical research around and access to us by phone and other sorts of goodies. So about half of our subscribers work with us that way, subscribing to our research on a particular marketplace or potentially multiple marketplaces. The balance of our subscribers belong to what we call the Omnichannel Stack Advisory. And so in this case, we're advising stack owners on strategic decisions and technology choices. You get access to all of our evaluation research because you're constantly being questioned about the tools that you have or tools you should be considering, pros and cons of different, sometimes overlapping vendors in your stack. And so we help you make successful decisions on a day-to-day basis. And then our third offering is new. It's around an executive council for omnichannel stack owners. So this is an add-on to the normal stack advisory where we meet twice a year, 2 or 3 times a year for confidential peer support to learn from each other and help each other out. So the different technologies that we cover are part of what we call the Subway Map. This is the 11th annual edition of the map that we just released last week. Really excited about it. The different lines represent different technologies that Real Story Group evaluates. So, traditionally we've covered the light blue line, web content management, the purple line, digital asset management, the brown line, marketing automation, campaign execution, the salmon line, which is customer relationship management. 18 months ago, we started covering CDPs, the orange line. Next week, we'll be releasing journey orchestration engines, which is the light purple line. And then over the rest of the year, we'll be releasing omnichannel operations hubs, which is the green line, and then content platforms, omnichannel content platforms, the red line. So I'll have a lot to talk about these in the context of how these stack up in your omnichannel stack. The point here, of course, is that there's some major vendors in this space that purport to do a number of things through a variety of different cloud and non-cloud offerings, but there's also most of these marketplaces are also highly fragmented, which means that there's a number of pure play vendors out in the periphery, and that's often where you see a lot of innovation and value. So the good news is you do have lots of choices across this landscape, and we kind of make it our mission in life to help you interpret those choices. But now let's talk about reference models. So this was a reference model that we elaborated, I want to say, maybe 5 years ago when we first came up with this. It's kind of a traditional digital marketing and engagement reference model. We've got major channels, some delivery services, and then the big, heavy content and engagement management systems that are the colored boxes, hopefully talking to some sort of customer data backbone. So, this was a useful way of helping us describe to our subscribers, how they can think about this sort of thing. And we know that most of you, if not all of you, have been spending a lot of time really beefing up those colored boxes. In other words, really adding a lot of richness and sophistication to your social engagement platforms, marketing automation and email, certainly web content and experience management, and digital and media asset management as well. And we've been investing more both from a resource standpoint and from a technology standpoint, and increasingly, rolling out to more sophisticated tooling there. The problem with this whole approach is it has left us with a number of different silos and a lot of difficulty trying to integrate kind of one-to-one against the other. And so really our take is that the traditional kind of MarTech or DX stack is too siloed for the omni-channel customer experience era. So if we start from the bottom left here, the core problem is that data gets stuck in back office repositories. So you have all this customer data in all these different places, and it's inconsistent and not really actionable across channels. But then in your content and engagement management layer, you've got all this content, experiences, and rules, but they're platform specific rather than enterprise wide. So the classic thing is you may have one offer that you're putting out through marketing and automation, and then you have to work and scramble to make sure that that offer gets aligned in your website and your social channels, and this can require a lot of very difficult and, quite frankly, not scalable collaboration. Then your decision logic ends up getting trapped in different individual delivery channels, and then what this leads to ultimately is your customers and prospects don't enjoy integrated, consistent experiences with you. And of course, we know that major enterprises like Amazon have trained them to get these integrated, consistent experiences. So that's kind of the benchmark you're working against here. And you can see a variety of symptoms on the right. I'm sure many of you experience these today. Inconsistent engagement. Your customer and prospect data is siloed and disconnected. Marketing is disconnected from sales. Even perhaps more urgently, service and support is disconnected from marketing and engagement. Your inbound digital experience efforts, AKA your web and mobile teams, are disconnected from your campaigns. And so, of course, you're trying to coordinate. We're all trying to coordinate across these different silos, but that becomes manual, fraught, and is really just not scalable. And so what we're seeing instead is a slowly but surely a move towards a more omni-channel stack. But part of the problem is that what we have here is vendors kind of doubling down on that model. By saying, well, we have this DXP that's just going to jam a bunch of stuff into a single, master cloud or series of clouds or a single platform, and I'm going to give you this digital experience platform that's nominally going to be multi-channel for you. And so we think this is completely the wrong approach. Certainly, this is something that major analyst firms have been recommending, and why we fundamentally disagree with Forrester and Gartner in terms of this strategy. That this idea that you should go big at the top of your stack at the engagement layer, because the important thing to remember here is that individual technology platforms are not omni-channel. A single vendor is not omni-channel. However, your stack, which is under your control, your stack can be omni-channel if you structure it that way. So let's look more closely about, what that means. Obviously, you don't want to be this guy, right? You don't want to say, wow, I'm just going to go all in with Salesforce, and Salesforce is going to make me omni-channel. Salesforce is not going to make you omni-channel. But here's the thing. Adobe isn't either, and IBM isn't either, and Oracle isn't either. What they're going to do is lock you into their engagement platforms, beef those up, make them more sophisticated, but ultimately then make your job of doing omni-channel CX more difficult. So here's the reference model that we've come up with as an alternative to that whole approach. We call it the Omnichannel Technology Stack. Again, you have engagement channels, offline and online at the top. Again, you have interaction and delivery services. We've got 5 listed here. Yours might be a little bit different, but clearly advertising is critical here. Applications where you may be conducting transactions, obviously very important. Financial services, e-commerce where you're selling things. In a B2B context or even B2C, you could be distributing through partners. And obviously you've got some kind of contact center. And this can go on and on, right? You may have a variety of different interaction and delivery services. Now you still have content and engagement management services. These are still important. CRM and Salesforce automation becomes less of a data source and more of a service here. Social engagement, again, email and marketing automation, WCM and DAM, all still important. But what we're suggesting here is that to really do omnichannel right, you have to have a series of enterprise foundation services that are disconnected from your individual content and engagement silos and are disconnected from your individual engagement channels. And so starting from the bottom, this includes customer identity and access management, what we're calling intelligence hubs for data-oriented analytics, reporting and visualization, predictive modeling, dashboards, so forth. In the green on the left, operations hubs to sort of hold all this together where your teams are doing collaboration, including collaboration across departments. Then over to the right, an omnichannel content platform for your content object store, for your base themes and assets. And then customer data platform, CDP. We've had quite a few recorded webinars on that. You can see our research around that. And then joining orchestration and decisioning, something we think is going to be really critical going forward for creating a single view of the customer and having the customer having a coherent experience with you across channels. So this really is where many of you are working towards, and we would argue is an effective target to start thinking about in the context of omni-channel customer experience. So if I was going to summarize what this means, it means moving key services lower in your stack, right? And moving capabilities from individual departmental or channel-specific silos into more enterprise-wide availability. So now your channel-specific stuff or your experience platform-specific services are still important. So if we look over here on the left, there are some channel-specific things you still want to do, including contextualization is very important. You may talk to your customers differently on Twitter than you do on Facebook, and certainly differently than through your CRM channels, right? Here's where you're doing some assembly and delivery of information and where customers are actually interacting with you. So these channels are still important. But the key difference here is moving services to make them more enterprise-wide, that you have core data available to all of your different channels and engagement arenas, core content, insights, orchestration, personalization, operational collaboration, and certainly omni-channel availability of all these different services. You move this, you abstract it out and move it lower in your stack, and then that way you can have a more omni-channel oriented strategies. Obviously, this is easier said than done. There's a lot of operational and financial issues here, but there's also some very significant technology implications. I'm going to drill down in particular on 4 of these different segments to describe some of our thinking about how these pieces fit together. Once again, I'll remind you that you can ask any questions in the GoToMeeting questions tab, and the slides are going to be made available to everyone in the next 48 hours. And then for those of you who are Real Story Group subscribers, we'll send you a link so that you can share the full recording of this with all of your peers. Okay. So we're arguing that 4 key platforms power omnichannel CX. And so starting from the right, you've got in purple campaign and journey orchestration decisioning, where you map, execute, view, measure, and optimize omni-channel customer journeys. An emerging space, very important, coming out of some long-standing decisioning technology. Customer data platforms, I'm going to presume most of you know about those already. These are some where you have your definitive prospect and customer data and segments and make those available to your frontline marketers and engagement specialists and experience specialists. What we're calling an omni-channel content platform, which is one-stop access to core marketing and engagement objects, and then operations hubs. So there's a lot more to say about this, except that because these are somewhat early days, these are, somewhat overlapping services as well. And although we would argue you should think about them separately, certainly vendors tend to blur these sorts of lines. You have to be aware of what vendors providing what service. So let's talk about each one briefly. You've probably seen slides like this around CDPs or customer data platforms. They take first-party and second and third-party data, but optionally put it into your customer data platform. You can do identity resolution, data enrichment, very critically segmentation, and then you put that data to work across various omni-channel environments, personalized advertising, potentially get accessible analytics out of it. So this is fundamentally what CDPs do, and marketing engagement people have long wanted this. The problem is that historically we had to build these custom ourselves, and now we have the opportunity in the marketplace to actually buy packaged solutions. And when I say marketplace, it is a big fragmented marketplace. As usual, there are suite vendors that are kind of catching up. Salesforce has announced they're going to build a CDP. Adobe kind of had a CDP and now made it a little bit more official. We're going to be updating our research here. Adobe's still not completely productized here. IBM and Oracle kind of nowhere to be seen, but there's this huge array of fast-growing and well-funded independent pure plays where we're seeing some vertical specialization, some other interesting things happening. Still an expanding marketplace, really interesting times. We have some of the deepest and most critical research into these vendors. Interesting that Microsoft, Amazon, and IBM, who all have kind of data lake stories, have not really focused a lot on packaged CDPs. So that's customer data platforms. And of course, what you want to do when you're evaluating any technology is to look at specific use cases, right? So there's at least 9 use cases for customer data platforms. Not all CDP vendors are going to support all use cases or support them evenly. And the other thing that you have to be aware of with CDPs is, do you want to support the use case with just data and segments, or do you want to actually have the CDP deliver the experience? We would say typically, no, you don't want the CDP to deliver experiences, but rather to support things like online personalization, to support e-commerce recommendation, to support outbound marketing campaign support, rather than do it itself. So this is when we look at CDP vendors, this is how we evaluate them, principally the extent to which they can fulfill these different sorts of scenarios. And as usual, as you would see in any of our research, typically a vendor is good at 2 or 3 things, okay at 2 or 3 others, and pretty bad or absent with 2 or 3 others. So it's really a matter of kind of matching up what you're trying to do relative to, the strengths and weaknesses of that particular vendor with respect to fulfilling these business use cases. Next marketplace interesting to talk about is journey orchestration engine tooling. We're going to be releasing some groundbreaking research on this in the next 10 days or so. Basically what they do is take data and events in and allow you to watch and learn what's happening, then plan and map different decisions and journeys, and then activate those journeys, view what's happening, and perhaps analyze and optimize. Now, not all Joe vendors do all these things, and certainly not all Joe vendors talk to effectively all of these different channels that you see below. So there's a lot of variation here in this industry, a lot of really incredible power in these platforms, but also a lot of novel concepts and still a marketplace still kind of forming itself. Once again, we see 6 key use cases, and once again, our research suggests that no vendor is good at more than like 2 or 3 of these. So you'll want to sort of prioritize what's important for you. But customer data platforms and journey orchestration engines definitely go hand in hand, 2 critical pieces if you want to take an omni-channel approach to customer experience. Once again, a marketplace divided by suite vendors versus best of breed. Many of the suite vendors are coming at this, particularly from the top here, Adobe, Salesforce, Oracle, and IBM, from the context of their marketing automation and email platforms. In other words, they're very focused on marketing-oriented use cases, less so that you see underneath here with these 4 that are coming at it from more of a customer service orientation. So again, the marketplace is somewhat fragmented, not just in terms of the number of vendors, but in terms of the state of the extent of their support for different use cases. Here's an example from Oracle. They have this cool journey mapping thing, but it's really mostly around outbound messaging, right? And so if your journeys, you want to interweave sales and service and support and point of sale and that sort of thing into it, probably not a good candidate. Omnichannel content platform, this is interesting. We're engaged in this research right now, going to be releasing a vendor evaluation report. This space has kind of got calved off from the digital asset management space, but the key thing here is that you're storing content objects for base themes and assets. So it's a lot more than just media. You also have text and copy, potentially offers, micro experiences. You're tracking where these assets are used. Now, this isn't all of your engagement content. It's just the core content that you want to be able to share across channels. So there's a lot of requirements that come out of that, and it's a very interesting kind of emerging space. We'll have more to say about this later this summer. Then finally, the green line from our subway map is the omnichannel operations hubs. A lot of interesting spaces here. Historically, this was covered by marketing resource management, campaign management, creative and content operations management. A lot of overlapping services here. So this is very confusing, but the idea is that if you throw a lot of these out there, your employees can get overwhelmed by too many different ones. So we suggest really focusing on what are the most important hub categories and then seeing, which vendors supply which services. So we'll be releasing some research on this in Q4, but suffice it to say that there are a lot of vendors here and a lot of overlapping capabilities. So you have to be very clear to leave labels behind and instead look at this from a scenario standpoint and say, what is it that I'm really trying to accomplish? So here's some kind of final thoughts, and then we'll have time to turn to your questions. So first of all, if you care about omnichannel customer experience, then think enterprise and not departmental. Right? So this is the major shift that's happening here. You want to be enthusiastic about the technology. I think you can hear some enthusiasm in my voice, but you also want to be skeptical about the vendors, including the major name vendors. A lot of these are emerging spaces, some early thinking on this in some cases. So you really want to do very careful diligence. Clearly, that's an area where we can help you. Then the other thing that we're recommending here is invest low and simplify high. And I'll have a bit more to say about that in a minute, but the basic concept here is that you look to going forward, putting more resources into enterprise foundation services and then simplifying the resources and hopefully the spend in terms of content and engagement management services. That those services become less the brains of your operation and more the order takers. That the brains of your operation is really happening lower in your stack and an enterprise-wide foundational level. And it's the one delivering the content, the data, and the decisions to then your delivery environments, right? Always remember that platforms and vendors themselves are not omni-channel. They may be trying to expand their WCM platform to make it more multi-channel. CRM vendor may be trying to expand its CRM to include more capabilities, but that just compounds your problem because they're really too high in the stack for this kind of lateral integration and information and decision and data sharing to happen. So it's really up to you to build an omni-channel stack. And again, we think focusing on enterprise foundation services going forward with all of the caveats about fragmented marketplaces and young vendors and all of that, but focusing on enterprise foundation services, we think is a key part of the technical strategy associated with this. So here's an example in terms of getting simpler. At the engagement tier right now, from a web content and experience manager and WCM perspective, you have 3 vendors up here that have a lot of mind share: Adobe, Acquia, Sitecore. These are very sophisticated platforms with a lot of integrated data, decisioning, and other services built right in, including personalization in many cases. And I think there's an open question about whether these are just too heavy for the omni-channel world. And so there's an opportunity here as you invest and put resources lower in your stack, you can think about simpler solutions higher in your stack because, again, they're more assembly spaces and order takers rather than the brains of your omni-channel operation. And so if you're looking at Adobe or Acquia or Sitecore, any of them, you should also be looking at simpler tools that compete with them that might be a better fit long-term for you. So this is what we call Stacy, the stack owner. We work a lot with Stacy and her peers, stack owners in large enterprises. She's got a lot of things to do there on the left. She's got a lot of people asking her questions day in and day out about her stack. And what we try to do is provide kind of a shield to help answer some of those questions and help Stacy relax and make good decisions. So if there's any way that we can help your organization do that, feel free to reach out. Here's our contact information. You can email us, find us on LinkedIn, therealstorygroup.com/try URL. That's to download a free sample of any of our research. So you can get free vendor evaluations across all of these different marketplaces, the exception being journey orchestration, which again will be available in about 10 days or so. So you can try out our research and see whether you find it useful or not. So Scott, if you want to just wrap up this part, and I will jump to the questions real quickly.
Excellent. Great. Thanks, Tony. A lot of good information to absorb there. And as Tony mentioned, we certainly encourage you to take a look at samples of our research in one or many of the different areas. You're welcome to take a look at those. And then you can actually also try out the tools that are included with the subscription, such as Real Quadrant, where you can build a custom shortlist, and Real Time, where you can see a side-by-side vendor comparison. I'd be happy to take you on a behind-the-scenes tour of the subscriber experience as well, so you can get a really good look at what will be available to you if you don't have a subscription already. Certainly reach out to us at explore@realstorygroup.com if you'd like to get that scheduled. Tony, we do a number of questions that came in. Hoping you can see those on your side.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll go through them real quick. So Mike's got several questions. Do you have examples of companies that match up in your charts by platform? Definitely. That's what the Omnichannel Subway map is, that you can find at realstorygroup.com/vendor map, where we put companies to subway lines, and that's how you can tell. Now, by cost, SMB versus enterprise, this is a trickier thing. We do this in some of our decision support tools, like our Real Quadrant generator, where you kind of identify that. Cost is a tricky one, and in some of these spaces, it's not always clear, the SMB versus enterprise. One of the things that we do look for in all of our evaluations are strategic considerations, where we do look for some significant enterprise qualifiers, like in terms of ecosystem, support, channel, and so forth. And Mike is continuing that his belief is that suite vendors are attempting to build the God box for MarTech. And I think, that's not a bad way of putting it. I think that if it is a God box, then I would say it's a false God that we're worshiping to, that you can get all of these services from a single vendor or even two platforms. This is a multi-vendor world, and that's the world we're going to be living in. And I think we know that there's going to be even more vendors coming on board. And that's why it's so important to get your enterprise foundation in order, because that's how you're going to, strong foundation, you can add more rooms to the house. Claudia is asking, what's the difference between campaign and journey orchestration, the purple box, versus email and marketing automation platforms, the yellow box? It's a great question. There is some overlap in as much as email and marketing automation platforms would nominally try to be omni-channel, but generally they're not. Usually they just focus on outbound email and mobile messaging scenarios, whereas an omni-channel journey orchestration platform should allow you to account for and set decisions across all of the different customer touch points, including potentially direct mail, email, inbound web, customer service, support, sales, potentially even point of sales, and so on and so forth, and be able to account for the full breadth of a customer's journey, as opposed to just how am I going to message them. Any key principles, Mark is asking, any key principles to consider regarding connectivity when building an omnichannel stack? Well, I think the way that we look at this is we look very closely at the vendors in terms of their connector frameworks. And I think this is really an important area, is that we want them to have not just connectors to the different platforms, which is important, particularly for journey orchestration and CDP, but that one of the things we look for is, do you have a connector framework, which provides then a set of tooling around which inevitably you have to build custom connectors, which we see all the time. Claudia is also asking, I don't understand the difference between digital asset management, the dark purple box, and content platforms, which is the red box. Are they not the same kind of platforms? It's a great question, because we think omni-channel content platforms are emerging out of two or three segments. One is certainly some of the high-end digital asset management services, particularly those that are cloud native. The other area that's coming to bear here is headless WCM, and the other one are content marketing platforms. So there's a kind of a fusion of those three, and there's a set of vendors that are targeting this lower level use case. Not all of them are. It's a technically very complex use case to solve. So it's a kind of an exit of a series of vendors from WCM, DAN, and content marketing who are deciding to put themselves lower in the stack. So really interesting times. Frederic is asking that we worked on different DAM scenarios. That's true. And are we testing vendors with that? Definitely. We've come out with new scenarios, updated, more modern scenarios for our DAM vendors, and we definitely use those in evaluating vendors today. Romy is asking a great question. Is your stack view mostly for B2B marketing organizations that can apply to B2C? Where does DMP come into this, for example, or is the same as CDP? What we tried to do, Romy, was put together a single stack as a reference model that could be used B2B or B2C. And so the reality is, though, that stack is likely to change based on B2B versus B2C. And certainly in a B2C context, you may have a DMP, which would likely coexist and feed into your CDP, for sure. Romain is asking, can headless CMS be used as a main content platform? In some cases, yes. I'm a little bit skeptical, but we're going to be evaluating a couple of them in that context. The reason why I'm skeptical is that they may not be object-oriented enough. They may not have the ability to support rich media either in the way that really is critical for this. So Richard is asking an interesting question. In your opinion, what's the best structure with an organization to go about making stack buying decisions? You mentioned Stacy, the stack owner. I don't think every client has such an individual. Great question. But I also think an individual is the right answer. Be grateful to hear your thoughts on the effective stack stakeholder groups. You know, Philip, Richard, that's a great question, and Stacy is in a sense a personification of what is in reality a team of people. So you're right. There's a need here for, in many cases, a governance structure that's a council. What we have seen often, though, is one of the stack owners, say the MarTech stack owner, the DX stack owner, or the advertising stack owner, kind of leap into the piazza and say, look, we have to, you know, typically there's one who kind of takes the lead and says, look, we've got to take an omni-channel approach to this. This isn't working for us. My team is trying to coordinate with yours and it's not working. And so very often we see a single stack owner really just kind of push themselves forward to break out of the box. And that's often what's helped catalyze this. But the reality is that you're right, that we've got to get all of the different stakeholders together, even to agree on things like naming conventions and connector frameworks and all of this other stuff. And so we didn't get into it today, but there's an implied governance model here. Super. So let's see, I'm occasionally breaking up. Sorry for that. Let's see, one last question from Mike. How does the CMO VP marketing go to hire trained users and architects? Oh my goodness gracious. Well, I think the first thing you do is align with your IT organization, or hopefully those people exist already. And there's a lot of organizational models around MarTech. We like to see really strong technical chops that report up, at least dual reporting through marketing and IT. It's possible that that those architects already exist in your organization. It's just that they are outside of the marketing organization and maybe need to be lured in. So these are great questions, and really appreciate your engagement today. Look forward to connecting with those of you who are already subscribers. If you'd like to set up some individual sessions, or if you'd like us to present this to your enterprise as a whole, as a private educational webinar or workshop, that's certainly something that if you have a Plus subscription, we can do. In the meantime, I encourage you to join us a week from this Thursday, where we will be unveiling our journey orchestration vendor research. I'm really excited about that. And in the meantime, this is Tony Byrne for Scott Dill, wishing you a great rest of your week. Thanks again. So long.